We often picture plants as, these still, silent beings just rooted in place, passively soaking up sunlight. But what if that quiet exterior hides this incredibly dynamic world? What if they're sensing threats, adapting, communicating in ways we're only just beginning to really grasp? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a fascinating look into the world of plant behavior. Our mission is to unpack some really astonishing insights, to explore how plants perceive their world, manage growth, and even protect themselves. It's a deep dive that, honestly, will challenge that whole idea of plants being just passive organisms. Get ready for some serious aha moments. I was truly surprised by some of this, like how plants can apparently smell smoke or see light, and we'll uncover their ingenious chemical messengers and some really clever survival tactics. They're far more responsive than you might imagine. Okay, so right from the start, what really jumps out is this core idea. Plants are constantly sensing, responding to both external and internal conditions. It's described as a complex network. How does that initial sensing even begin, like at the cellular level?
Well, what's really fascinating is how universal this seems to be. Very much like in animals, plant cells have these specific receptor molecules. They're either on their outer membranes or maybe inside in the cytoplasm. And these receptors, they recognize and bind to very particular pieces of information. Could be a hormone, could be a physical signal. And once that binding happens, it kicks off a whole cascade of events. It's called signal transduction.
Signal transduction. So it's not just a simple reaction then. There's a whole pathway involved.
Absolutely not simple. Once that signal is received, it gets transmitted through the cell. And importantly, it's often amplified quite significantly. This can lead to hundreds of specific molecular responses, things like adding chemical tags to molecules, changing ion flow across membranes, or even flipping specific genes on or off right inside the nucleus. And interestingly, chemical messengers like nitric oxide, NO, which most people know from animal biology.
Right.
Well, NO also functions as a really important cellular signal in plants. It helps integrate internal and external information to control big things like flowering time.
Okay, that integration is key. Now, one of the most surprising things for me in the material was this idea that plants can actually smell smoke. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good one. You know how after a fire, landscapes often regrow really quickly with loads of seedlings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see that green fuzz coming back.
Exactly. Part of the explanation is that many seeds can detect a compound called butanolide. It's a stable, water-soluble component of smoke formed when cellulose burns.
Yeah.
And even tiny amounts absorbed by dormant seeds are enough to trigger germination.
Wow, so it's like a go signal from the fire itself.
Precisely. And it's practical knowledge, too. People in horticulture and habitat restoration actually use this stuff to promote growth, even without a real fire.
That's clever. And it's not just scent, is it? The source says plants also kind of see their light environment, not just for photosynthesis, but like to judge conditions.
That's right. Plant vision, you could call it, that is based on light-sensitive pigments. It's actually quite similar in principle to animal vision. So, for instance, there's cryptochrome. It's a blue light receptor. It helps seedlings figure out if there's enough light to even bother starting photosynthesis.
So it checks first.
Yeah. In darkness, there's this protein called CoP1 that prevents chlorophyll production. Makes sense, right? Don't make green stuff if there's no light.
Right, waste of energy.
But when blue light hits, it changes the cryptochrome molecule so it binds to CoP1. That removes the block, and the seedling gets the green light, literally, to produce leaves and chlorophyll.
Okay. And what about phototropins? They're mentioned too.
Ah, yes. Phototropins are what influence growth towards light. That explains why your houseplants always end up leaning towards the window. They're following the light using those phototropins.
Okay, so we have signals coming in, being processed. But what about the internal messengers, the ones driving growth and development? Our source gets deep into plant hormones. An amazing array, really. Where should we start?
Auxins. Auxins are a great place to start. They're absolutely crucial. Produced mainly in young leaves, then transported downwards through the plant.
Downwards, okay.
And they influence so much. Fruit production, for one, they help prevent things like apples and pears dropping off the tree too early. They also make cells excrete acid into their cell walls.
Acid? Why?
It loosens the cell walls, makes them more flexible, allowing the cells to expand. This is fundamental to how shoots grow and how plants respond to light and gravity. It literally shapes the plant.
Yeah, the practical applications are quite something. I saw the mention of auxin 2-fionine-4D being used as an herbicide.
Yes, exactly. 2,4-D is widely used for broadleaf weeds because grasses have a natural ability to inactivate it, so it targets the weeds more specifically.
But there's a darker side, too. The source mentions Agent Orange.
That's the historical context, yes.
Ah.
Agent Orange was a mixture of 2004-D and another related compound, 2004-5-T. The issue is that during the manufacturing process for 2004-5-T, it often got contaminated with dioxin, which is a really potent carcinogen. That contamination led to its devastating health effects.
Right, important context. Okay, moving beyond auxins, what about cytokinins? These are anti-aging ones.
That's their claim to fame, yes. They have anti-aging effects, which is why florists often spray them on cut flowers, helps them last longer by delaying senescence or aging.
Makes sense.
They're also incredibly useful in plant tissue culture, for cloning plants.
How does that work?
Well, by carefully adjusting the ratio of auxins to cytokinins in the growth medium, scientists can take a lump of undifferentiated plant cells called callus tissue and induce it to form either roots or shoots. You can generate hundreds, even thousands of identical plants this way. Really valuable for agriculture and horticulture.
Cloning plants. Amazing. And then there's ethylene, the ripening hormone, right? This explains the one bad apple spoils the barrel thing.
Exactly that. Ripe fruit releases ethylene gas. It diffuses through the air, reaches nearby fruit, and signals them to speed up their own ripening.
So it's a chain reaction.
It is. But ethylene does more than just ripen fruit. It's also vital for seedlings pushing through soil. It triggers something called the triple response in seedlings trying to break through, say, hard or crusty soil.
Triple response.
Yeah, first, it inhibits the stem and root from elongating too much. Second, it causes the stem to swell up, making it thicker and stronger. And third, it forms a protective hook shape at the tip of the stem. This hook shields the delicate growing point as it forces its way up. Pretty ingenious.
That is clever. Okay, and gibberellins. I know these make grades bigger. And they're linked to plant height.
That's right. Gibberellins are well known for promoting stem elongation. Many dwarf varieties of plants simply produce less gibberellin naturally.
Ah, okay, so it's just a hormonal difference.
Often, yes. They also make grapes larger, commercially applied for that reason. But they have another really critical role too, seed germination.
How so?
They promote the breakdown of starches stored inside the seed into usable sugars. This gives the growing seedling the energy it needs to get started.
And brewers use this.
They do. In making malt for beer, gibberellins are often applied to barley seeds. It ensures all the seeds germinate at roughly the same time, which is crucial for consistent malt production.
Okay, so we've got hormones for growth, ripening, germination. What about defense? Do plants have stress hormones like we might think of adrenaline or cortisol in animals?
Oh, absolutely. They have a whole suite of stress-related hormones. Abscisic acid, usually called ABA, is a major one. Think of ABA like the brakes on a car. It slows down plant metabolism when conditions are bad, drought, cold, whatever. It induces dormancy in seeds and buds, keeping them safe until conditions improve. And critically, it helps plants conserve water by signaling the stomata, the pores on leaves, to close during drought.
Okay, ABA is the brake. What else?
Then you've got brassinosteroids. These help protect plants against a range of stresses: heat, cold, salty soil, even herbicide injury. There's cystamin, which acts like an alarm signal. If a plant gets wounded, cystamin spreads the message through the plant, triggering defenses elsewhere. It's quite similar to an animal's inflammatory response, in principle.
Wow, a whole plant alarm.
And salicylic acid, chemically related to aspirin. It helps in disease defense and, interestingly, also slows down flower aging. That's a trick gardeners sometimes use, putting aspirin in vase water.
I've heard of that.
Jasmonic acid helps fight off fungal infections. And even sugars, believe it or not, have recently been identified as having hormone-like signaling roles, especially in defense.
Sugars as signals. Fascinating. It's clear plants are incredibly sensitive chemically. But they also respond to physical cues, right? Light, gravity, touch. The source mentions light timing events like flowering.
Yes, and this brings up a really interesting question.
Right.
How do plants tell time? How do they know when seasons are changing, when to flower? They use a process called photoperiodism. Basically, they measure the length of the night.
The night, not the day.
Primarily the length of uninterrupted darkness. They do this using a special pigment called phytochrome. Phytochrome acts almost like an electric light switch. It can flip between two forms. Red light, like daylight, turns it on. Far red light, or simply darkness over time, turns it off or converts it back slowly.
Okay, so it's tracking darkness duration. That explains short day and long day plants.
Exactly. Short-day plants, like poinsettias or chrysanthemums, will only flower when the night is longer than a certain critical length. Long-day plants, like spinach or lettuce, need the night to be shorter than a critical length to flower.
And that's why a flash of light at night can mess them up.
Precisely. A brief flash of red light during a long night effectively breaks that dark period. From the plant's perspective, it's now 2 short nights, not 1 long one, so it can prevent a short-day plant from flowering.
Clever. How does the internal clock fit in?
Well, that phytochrome switch seems to reset the plant's internal circadian clock each day at sunrise. This clock then controls the buildup of certain proteins. One key protein is called constans, or SO. In long-day plants, for example, long days allow CO protein to accumulate. When it reaches a critical level, it turns on the flowering genes.
Amazing internal timing. And gravity. Obviously, shoots go up, roots go down. How do they know?
That's gravitropism. Auxins, those hormones we talked about, are involved again. As for how they sense gravity, well, that's still debated. One leading idea involves dense, starch-filled plastids called statoliths. They're heavy, and they settle at the bottom of certain cells, signaling down.
Like tiny weights inside the cells.
Kind of, yeah. Another idea is that the sheer weight of the cell's cytoplasm pulling on the cell structure provides the signal. It's likely complex.
Still figuring that one out. What about touch? Wind, rain, rubbing against things.
That's called thigmotropism growth responses triggered by touch. If you regularly rub plant stems, they often end up shorter and stockier. Yeah, it's a response to mechanical stress. And think about the sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica.
Oh yeah, the one that folds its leaves instantly.
Right, touch it and the leaves collapse. This might be to reduce water loss and wind, or maybe make it look less appealing to herbivores. Vines are another great example. Their tendrils coil around supports. They even do this sort of slow, circular swaying motion called nutation, basically searching for something to grab onto.
Searching. It really makes you think differently about them. Okay, plants face huge environmental stresses. Flooding, drought, heat, cold. How do they cope? Let's start with flooding. Too much water seems bad.
It is, mainly because it cuts off oxygen supply to the roots. Roots need oxygen for respiration, just like we do.
So what do?
In waterlogged soil, ethylene, that hormone again, builds up. This triggers a process in some root cells called programmed cell death. It sounds drastic, but it creates continuous open channels within the root tissue. These channels are called parenchyma.
Parenchyma, like air channels.
Exactly. They act like snorkels, allowing oxygen to diffuse down from the shoots, which are above water, to the submerged roots.
Wow, they build their own snorkels.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the opposite problem, drought? Closing stomata helps, but what if it gets really bad?
Well, some plants are adapted to avoid drought altogether. Annual plants in deserts might time their whole life cycle to coincide with brief, rainy periods, producing seeds before the dry season hits hard.
Get in, get out.
Pretty much. Others survive drought underground as dormant bulbs or rhizomes. And then you have truly desiccation-tolerant plants. The resurrection plant is a famous example.
I've seen pictures of those, like dried up balls that turn green again.
That's them. They can survive losing almost all their water for months. They do this partly by accumulating lots of specific sugars, like sucrose, and special proteins called dehydrins. These molecules help stabilize cell membranes and proteins, preventing irreversible damage during extreme drying.
Amazing resilience. What about temperature extremes? Heat and cold.
For heat stress, plants ramp up production of heat shock proteins. These act like chaperones, helping other essential proteins and enzymes maintain their correct shape and function, preventing them from essentially cooking and denaturing. Some plants even release volatile compounds like isoprene gas, which seems to help protect the photosynthetic machinery from heat damage.
And cold.
In cold climates, resistant plants often increase the concentration of solutes like ions and sugars in their cell sap.
Like antifreeze.
Exactly like antifreeze. It lowers the freezing point of the water inside the cells, making it harder for damaging ice crystals to form. And of course, many trees in cold regions use the strategy of dropping their leaves, entirely becoming deciduous to reduce water loss and damage during winter.
Right. And this idea of vernalization, that's related to cold, isn't it?
Yes, vernalization is a requirement for some plants to experience a prolonged period of cold before they can flower. It's a mechanism to ensure they don't flower too early, say during a warm spell in autumn or winter, only to have their flowers killed by a subsequent frost.
So it delays flowering until spring is truly underway.
Correct. Winter wheat is a classic example. It needs that long cold exposure. There are specific genes involved, like VRN1 and VRN2, that regulate this process, acting like a sort of memory of winter.
A genetic memory of winter.
Nah.
Incredible. Okay, finally, let's talk about defense against attackers, pathogens like viruses, bacteria, fungi. It sounds like a constant battle.
It really is. Plants have frontline defenses, like the waxy cuticle on leaves or producing toxins just as a general deterrent. Preformed barriers.
Like walls and chemical weapons.
Pretty much. But they also have active inducible defenses. One of the most dramatic is the hypersensitive response, or HR. This happens when a specific resistance gene in the plant recognizes a corresponding virulence gene in the pathogen. It's like matching a specific lock and key.
And when they match,
the plant mounts a rapid, localized defense. It produces compounds to kill the pathogen directly. It strengthens the cell walls around the infection site to seal it off. And sometimes it even triggers programmed cell death in its own infected cells, basically sacrificing a small area to contain the invader. You often see this as little dead, necrotic spots on leaves.
So they quarantine the infection, even sacrificing their own tissue.
Exactly. They'll produce things like hydrogen peroxide and signal molecules like NO and salicylic acid to bolster those cell walls. But even more impressively, this initial localized defense can trigger a state of heightened alert throughout the entire plant. This is called systemic acquired resistance, or SAR.
SAR, like an all-plant immune boost.
That's a good way to put it. Once a plant has successfully fought off an infection in one part, the whole plant becomes less susceptible to a broad range of different pathogens for a period of time. It's a general priming of defenses.
How does that alarm signal spread? How do the other parts of the plant know what happened?
That peptide hormone, cysteamine, we mentioned earlier, is one way. It can travel through the plant's vascular system, like the bloodstream. When it reaches distant tissues, it alerts them to the ongoing attack. These tissues then take preemptive action, maybe producing defensive enzymes or accumulating toxins like tannins. It effectively acts like a kind of vaccination for the whole plant, preparing it for potential future attacks based on the initial one.
What an incredible deep dive this has been. It's just, plants are so much more than static green things. We've seen they can sense their world in remarkable ways. Smelling smoke, seeing light, responding to touch and gravity. They produce this complex cocktail of hormones, controlling everything from fruit ripening to germination to stress responses.
And their survival strategies against drought, flood, heat, cold, plus that sophisticated immune system fighting off pathogens, they're incredibly dynamic and adaptive.
Yeah, understanding all this, it completely changes how you look at the plant world, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It really highlights their resilience, their ingenuity in navigating the environment. Many strategies mirror animal survival, but they're executed in these unique, silent, plant-specific ways.
So maybe next time you're walking through a garden or a park or a forest, just pause for a moment. Consider all the invisible conversations, the signals, the tiny battles may be happening all around you. What hidden messages do you think those plants are sending or receiving right now? And you have to wonder, how will our growing understanding of their world continue to transform our own?